guys, I wasn't sure if I was going to be doing a top 10 this month, a top 10 match list like I typically do. I thought that I was just way too busy this month, still worried about the move and furnishing my new home and various other things. There's, work has been crazy and all the other projects I'm working on this channel with Kaiju movie reviews, Star Wars reviews, and the WrestleMania live streams that I just started. I wasn't sure I would have time to do a top 10. And I didn't even know what I wanted to do. But then this week's Raw gave me inspiration in a way where they celebrated Ric Flair's 70th birthday. And I thought, well, shit, why don't I just do a top 10 Ric Flair match? Because, I'm not saying this as an insult to Ric Flair, and I'm going to gush all over Ric Flair in a little bit, but when it came to putting together a top 10 favorite match list for Ric Flair, that wasn't that hard for me because I pretty much knew exactly what I was going to put on the list without too much thought. I think I started, typically when I do these things, I'll put together a list, and then I'll rewatch and watch certain matches to try and whittle the list down to 10. And some videos, I've had as many as 30 matches. But with Flair, not that there was any shortage of great matches with Flair. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's just that the matches that Ric Flair had that I really, really like, I knew I was going to put on the list. So it wasn't that hard to slap together a top 10 favorite Ric Flair match list. So that was fairly easy. So I was able to get you guys a top 10 match list this month. And I get to honor the Nature Boy in the process, which is fantastic. But before I jump into all of that, I do want to talk about certain events that took place on both Raw and SmackDown this week. Yes, I watched them both again this week. It's amazing. It's crazy. I'm like getting back into the habit. I'm like a heroin addict going back for more. It's right back into the habit of watching WWE every week. But I have been watching them on Hulu rather than watching them live. I find that much more palatable and much easier to digest than allowing an over 3-hour block on Monday nights. The Hulu episode is only an hour and a half with a few shorter commercials thrown in, so it doesn't take that long to get through it compared to if I'd watched it on Monday nights. And things like that. It's just easier to watch. And if something's dragging, I can skip over it. It's just so much better that way. At least for right now. But there were a few major things that happened on Raw. First of all, we got the return of Roman Reigns, who announced that his leukemia is in remission, and it looks like he's back just in time for WrestleMania. Now, I don't want to be that guy. I really don't want to be an asshole. I really, really don't. And based on the promo that Roman cut on Raw this week, I'm going to assume that it's legitimate. It's felt very natural and heartfelt what he said, and Roman's not that great on the stick to fake it, I don't think. So I'm going to take it at face value, but I have to mention some lingering suspicions. Roman Reigns is very controversial figure. Most of the fan base hates him. Announces he has leukemia, gets all the sympathy in the world, and now he's back just in time for WrestleMania. That is some fortuitous timing, I will say. And the timing is what's really throwing me off. If he'd come back, I don't know, like 3 months from now, or post WrestleMania, I'd be like, all right. But he's only gone for 4 months, and I'm just kind of like, I mean, I don't want to believe that WWE didn't work, I want to believe that WWE didn't work cancer just to get sympathy on their top babyface, but then I remember this is the same company that used Paul Bearer's death and Eddie Guerrero's death for WrestleMania storylines. This is the same company that did a necrophilia angle. The same company that had Sergeant Slaughter play an Iraqi sympathizer at the height of the the Gulf War. Good taste hasn't always been a high priority for the WWE, even in their so-called PG era. I thought the Roman segment did come off very well, and I thought Roman did come off as believable. So I'm gonna take it at face value. But I gotta admit, when I read the results and I heard what happened, my bullshit alarm immediately went off. So I hope to God they didn't work any of us just to try and get sympathy on Roman. But I guess we'll never know. But it's kind of like the Montreal screw job. You know, we all assumed that it was real and that it wasn't a work, but there'll always be that nagging suspicion in the back of my mind that it was. I'm even, you know, I think back to when Daniel Bryan got fired after the Nexus angle. I'm not convinced that that wasn't a work. I'm not. It was too weird and too odd in how it was executed that it's just, there were so many things about it that were strange. To where it's like, was that really a work, or was that just them trying to work the internet? Or was that really a shoot that he got fired, or was it them trying to work the internet? I don't know. I've had my suspicions. Let me put it that way. So, Roman Reigns is back. What's he going to be doing at WrestleMania? Assuming he's going to be wrestling, I don't know. It looks like, I mean, Seth is going to be wrapped up with Brock. Dean, God only knows what he's doing. So it's not like they're going to do a Shield match. I can't really think of any. I mean, I would have thought they would have done Roman versus Batista, but that's not where they're going, and that leads me into the ending. Ric Flair's 70th birthday party was destroyed by Batista, who attacked Flair backstage and called out Triple H. So it looks like we're going to be getting Triple H versus Batista at WrestleMania 35. I mean, I don't object to Batista coming back. My whole thing is, and I've said it before, but in several other instances, like when the rumor was that they were going to do Rock versus Triple H, I was like, why? We've seen it. I've seen that match like a million times. Why not do something I've never seen before? How about that? And with Batista, you know, there are a few solid matches that you could probably do with him. You could do what I mentioned, Batista versus Roman Reigns. Now that Roman, you know, the fans like him now. We'll see how long that lasts. You could probably do that match and put Roman over and you know, further make Roman the face of the company. You could do Roman versus AJ, which they're not. They're going to do AJ versus Orton. But, you know, AJ and Batista, which is what I meant to say. I think I said Roman versus AJ, but that doesn't make any sense. But Batista versus AJ, they have some, you know, heat going back to like the mid-2000s where Batista said that AJ Styles' style of wrestling is not really wrestling or something, and basically called him a spot monkey without calling him a spot monkey. And AJ replied to that in an interview. So you could probably play with that a little bit. It's like, oh, hey, remember I'm the guy you said wasn't good enough. I'm now, you know, I was WWE champion for so-and-so many months, so, you know, eat my dick. Or what? Not that AJ would ever say eat my dick, but you know what I mean. One other match they could do is Batista versus Samoa Joe. Just have them knock the crap out of each other for 8 to 10 minutes, and that would be a really solid one to do as well. So they've got some options for Batista. I would rather they create a match that I've never seen before. And the Batista Triple H matches weren't bad back in 2005. They really weren't. And I'm harsh on Triple H's WrestleMania matches. I thought the Mania 21 match was okay. I thought their Backlash match a month later was a little better than that. And I thought their Hell in a Cell was pretty solid. So it's like, and, you know, they had an overall good storyline. They had put Batista on the map. So it was one of the few instances of Triple H actually making a star. And I thought it came off fine, but I don't need to see it again. I'm good. I don't need to see Triple H and Batista again. But it looks like we're going to be getting Triple H and Batista again. I'm like, oh, joy. Okay. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's going to be a bad match. It's hard for me to get super invested in it. Unless they cook up something really good to really put some sizzle on the steak, it's going to be really hard for me to get invested in that match just because I feel like I've seen it already. It's like, we've been here. We've done this. I'm good. If you're going to bring back part-timers, just have them do new things. Have them do things I've never seen before. And that's typically my attitude. But Batista Triple H, that match was the rumored match going as far back as last year when Batista made a special appearance on SmackDown. And they brought, I think it was when it was the 1000th episode of SmackDown, I think, where they brought out Evolution, which made no sense because, as far as I know, Evolution had never been on SmackDown. But Yeah, I remember them teasing the match there, and we all kind of suspected that was going to be Batista and Triple H at WrestleMania. So sure enough, it looks like that's what we're getting. I mean, the segment itself at the end of the show came off well, and Batista was a nice surprise. So it was like the segment came off well. I'm just not overly interested in seeing the match, but that's neither here nor there. That moves us to SmackDown, where the major takeaway from that show is that Kevin Owens returned. God, everybody's returning. Batista, Roman Reigns, Kevin Owens. I hear Sami Zayn's getting close to coming back. It's like, oh my goodness. Just in time for Mania. But Kevin Owens came back, and Vince McMahon named him the #1 contender to Daniel Bryan's title at Fastlane over Kofi Kingston. What does this mean? It means that Kofi Kingston's getting the title shot at WrestleMania. I think they've realized they've kind of got a hot thing going with Kofi. I was like, well, fuck, why do it at Fastlane? Make him wait for it, and that's their mindset. Now, the way they're doing it is very similar to the Becky Lynch angle, where it's management is getting in the way of keeping him from the title. And that feels a bit repetitive and not as cool as what they are currently doing with Becky, which, by the way, I thought the segment with Ronda Rousey and Becky on Raw was good up until Ronda Rousey opened up her mouth, because that woman should never, ever speak. But how do you get to the point where she demands Becky being put back into the title match at WrestleMania? So, whatever. But anyway, I think that angle's going well. But with Kofi, it just kind of feels like, we're doing this with Becky. So it's kind of like... And we all kind of know that it's like, all right, Kofi's going to get the shot at Mania. That's where this is going. They kind of stumbled onto something here with Kofi being over with these remarkable performances. And I think they just want to get it to WrestleMania, which I'm fine with, because it's like, what the fuck else are they going to do with Daniel Bryan and the title? And, Kofi got over seemingly overnight as like a sympathetic underdog babyface. So why not run with that to WrestleMania? What does this mean for Fastlane? Well, it looks like Kevin Owens is kind of playing an insincere face right now, so he'll probably turn heel at some point. Maybe it'll be Bryan, Owens, and Kofi in a three-way at Mania. Again, we'll see how it all plays out. But, it's really all I have to say about Raw and SmackDown. I just wanted to... Really, the Roman thing and the Batista thing I really wanted to talk about. The Kofi thing, again, we know that that's going to WrestleMania, so I'm not going to worry about it. But in any case, now let's talk about Ric Flair, the Nature Boy, the man. To be the man, you gotta beat the man. Woo! He's a limousine riding, Learjet flying. Woo! Son of a gun! I could do the whole spiel, but I'm losing my voice. But Ric Flair, the Nature Boy, my history with him is a little interesting, because I didn't see Ric Flair for the first time until he was in the WWF in 1991. Keep in mind, I was 6 years old at this point. It was really just starting to get into wrestling. So I didn't know who Ric Flair was. So when Bobby Heenan brought him in, I was like, who is this? I don't even know who this guy is. But they were treating him in a way where I was supposed to know who he was. So that led to some tapes being shown my way. Eventually, I found out what WCW was, and I got several history lessons on Ric Flair's history and Jim Crockett Promotions and the NWA and various other things. And I saw what all the hype was about. I saw, he was, a guy that captured the essence of being a world champion. I've said before that of the Horsemen, the Four Horsemen, Arn was my favorite worker of the group, but absolutely Flair was the best character, and absolutely needed to be the leader of that group and the world champion. The way he carried himself, styling and profiling, the promos he cut, which were unlike any other, where he could just say the wildest and craziest things. Again, he was perfect for the 1980s. He was right out of that same cloth as everybody else, larger-than-life persona with larger-than-life promos. And he was able to sell a match with almost anybody, not quite. I mean, he did main event Starrcades with Nikita Koloff and Ronnie Garvin, which were not major highlights for him, but you look at his stuff with Sting and Ricky Steamboat and Lex Luger and the angle he did with Vader in '93 and various other things. I mean, Ric Flair was a guy that could really... whether it was heel or face, Actually, I'm thinking about 1989. I mean, that was really his best year when you look at the stuff with Steamboat and the feud with Terry Funk. But Ric Flair was a guy that could just capture all the passion you would expect out of a pro wrestler. And those are the things I remember most about Flair. Just really getting me to care about whatever he was doing. And that's... not everybody is as concerned about that as they should be. A lot of people think it's like, oh, I'll just go out there and do 450 splashes or whatever, and that'll be enough for me to get over. It's like, nah, man, you gotta do it the way Nate did it, and various other guys at that time would do it, where they would sell you on the match and then deliver. And yeah, and Ric Flair was a master of it. So, so with this video will now cover my personal top 10 favorite Ric Flair matches. Like I said, this was a list. I pretty much rattled this one off the top of my head because I knew exactly what my favorite Flair matches were, because the great ones really are great and stick out on my mind like the first time I saw those matches, it's like I saw them yesterday or something. They're just so vivid in my memory on how much I love those matches. So without further ado, let's just get started. Woo! First up at number 10, I'll be talking about one of Ric Flair's classic NWA World Title defenses as he defended the gold against the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, in a steel cage match from the Great American Bash in 1986. This was really kind of the main event of a tour of shows back when the Great American Bash was a series of events rather than just one big annual pay-per-view. Flair and Dusty were great rivals, resulting in 2 Starrcade main events in 84 and 85. But this is the match that I think of the most when I think of this pairing, mainly because it was the first one I ever saw. I got a videotape of it when I was fairly young, and this was the first time I got to see Dusty and Ric Flair tangle, and it was a violent, brutal, bloody affair. And I got to see Dusty Rhodes win the NWA World Title, which was pretty cool to young me. I didn't know that. Again, I talked about it earlier with Flair. You know, first time I saw him was the WWF. It was the same way with Dusty, so to see extra material with the American Dream Dusty Rhodes was really cool for me as well, especially with him winning a world title. So I think this match is definitely worth going out of your way to see. It's unfortunately not on the WWE Network, as far as I can tell, but it's a classic showdown between 2 Hall of Fame talents. Next up on my list is the 1992 Royal Rumble match, which Ric Flair won, securing his first ever WWF World Heavyweight Championship. And when I look back on the history of the Royal Rumble, I can't think of too many guys that are as individually linked to the Royal Rumble as Ric Flair is. His performance in this match seems to be beyond just a Royal Rumble winning performance. It's the stuff of legend, especially when you look at the caliber of talent that was in this match. Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, Jake Roberts, The Undertaker, Sid Vicious, Rowdy Roddy Piper. It was a who's who. It was a Hall of Fame all in one match. And for Ric Flair to come out of that thing victorious was really big for his career and really cemented him as a top player in the WWF at that time. And when I think back of Ric Flair's run in the WWF, there are 2 performances that I think of that are kind of the stuff of legend, and this is definitely one of them. It was, up to this point at least, I would say it's the greatest Royal Rumble performance up to that point. There are a few other ones that we can talk about that are close to it, but Ric Flair's performance in '92 is an all-time great for sure. And now we turn to a huge Starrcade main event for Ric Flair. This one signifying his return story to WCW. Following his run in the WWF, he would return to WCW in 1993. And this match signified kind of the culmination of his return. And it was also a return to form for Starrcade in a way. Towards the end of Flair's run, and even after he was gone, some of the Starrcade events had become somewhat gimmicky with things like the Battle Bowl and the Iron Man tournaments. But this match helped get back to the basics of what made Starrcade so great, and that was those big, epic feuds, storylines, and big main events that felt like they were can't miss. And here you had Ric Flair, the returning champion, trying to prove that he could do it one more time. And you had this big monster Vader who had just run through everybody, from Ron Simmons to Sting in that epic strap match they had, and the violent wars he had with Cactus Jack. He appeared to be unbeatable, so how on earth was Flair going to beat him? I don't know, but it made for a great story and a great main event worth checking out. And, man, I gotta say, it's better than what we were originally supposed to get, which was Vader versus Sid, but that didn't happen because of reasons. But anyway, I love this match for the build-up. Getting to this point and seeing if Ric Flair could defeat the Monster, I thought that was all handled very, very well. And it made for a very exciting story where Vader just brutalized Flair for most of the match. And Flair had to pull whatever tricks he could come up with to try and get any kind of an advantage over Vader, using his smarts and his cunning and his guile and a few dirty tricks along the way. It was also very fitting that Harley Race was Vader's manager for this, considering Harley Race was the one that lost the world title to Ric Flair at the very first Starrcade. So, considering this was the 10th anniversary of Starrcade, like for real, like the actual proper use of the word anniversary, it felt somewhat poetic and fortuitous to have Harley Race involved in that whole situation as well. So I thought it was a very exciting match, a big-time main event, and a match that captured the strengths of both talents. Viewers of my channel may remember last year I did several live streams recapping old episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event and the Clash of the Champions. And this was a match that I relived, rewatched during those live streams, and I loved it. This is one of the most legendary matches of Flair's career. I think this is one that comes up a lot in discussions about the great matches that Ric Flair had. But it was a perfect culmination of the rivalry that had been running ever since Terry Funk attacked Flair and did the famous angle where he broke his neck and everything. All that stuff was great, and it felt appropriate that these two should have like a wild brawl to settle the score. And they achieved that, and Terry Funk is one of my favorite guys to watch in pro wrestling because everything he does is just so believable. You believe that he's a crazy person. You believe that he's this wild redneck that will risk life and limb to perform whatever violent acts he needs to do to his opponent, and you put him in there with someone like Rick, and it made for a great, intense, and violent brawl, and like I said, one of the best matches in the history of the Clash of the Champions. It's a great match between two legends and definitely worth checking out. When I say the word Starrcade main event, there are a few that pop up in everybody's minds. I think Harley Race versus Ric Flair from '83 comes up a lot because it was the first and Ric Flair won the title that night, so obviously it's a big deal. I think the Dusty Rhodes Ric Flair matches come up because of who they are and what they meant to wrestling at that point in time. I think Sting and Hogan from '97 comes up for all the wrong reasons. Well, some right reasons, some wrong reasons. I think maybe Piper Hogan from '96 comes up. But when I think of my personal favorite Starrcade main event, I think of Luger and Flair from '88. I think that this match is absolutely fantastic and a great showcase for both men. And Lex Luger's a guy that gets kind of a bum rap, but as I've often said, look, he wasn't necessarily my favorite wrestler ever, but he did have his moments. And this main event at Starrcade, the culmination of the build-up between Lex Luger and Ric Flair, with Luger getting his shot against the Nature Boy, this was one of his moments. I thought that this was an outstanding main event with Luger playing the power guy and Flair playing the Weasley sniveling heel that gets tossed around and using dirty tricks to get the advantage. Might be the longest match I've ever seen Lex Luger have, but he carried his weight and he hung with Flair all the way through, and I thought it was a very exciting, well done main event. I think part of the reason maybe it gets overlooked is because Luger didn't win the title. Maybe if he did, this one would stand out a little bit more. But I think as far as like an exciting main event goes between two talents with very differing skill sets and differing styles, I thought it was an amazing match. And when I look back on Starrcade, this is probably... Okay, let me put it this way. When I do, at some point, do a top 10 favorite Starrcade match list, this match is probably going to be on there. I love the match that much. And obviously, this is another match that I watched as part of my Clash of the Champions live streams, and it's one of my personal favorites. Sting and Ric Flair is one of the all-time great rivalries in the history of professional wrestling. I think back to Great American Bash 1990, where Sting finally defeated him to win the title. I think back to the unification match that they had on a future edition of Clash of the Champions that was also very good. I think to the final Nitro, where they ended up having the final match in WCW history. Not their best match, but a very somber and fitting one, given how everything played out that night. But when I think of their best match, and when I think of the match that put the stinger on the map, I think of their NWA World Title Showdown from the very first Clash of the Champions, the match that was put up against WrestleMania 4, and one hell of a contest that really elevated Sting probably beyond what anyone would have expected of him at that point. The match ended up going to a 45-minute time limit draw. I know I've heard some people say that Sting should have walked out with the belt that night, but I think it did an amazing job of whetting our appetites and making us want to see Sting win the belt. I think it was one of those situations where it really painted Sting greatly as the chaser and put him on the path to ultimately defeat Flair for the title 2 years later. There were some hiccups in the road, namely Sting's injury, the knee injury that happened that prevented him from winning it earlier. But everything happens for a reason. I think this was a fantastic starting point for what would ultimately become one of my favorite rivalries in the careers of both men. Unfortunately, Ric Flair's only world title match in WrestleMania history carried some negative connotations over the years. Many fans have believed that it should have been Hogan versus Flair at this event. Speaking as someone who got sick of watching Hogan and Flair wrestle each other in WCW, them having a WrestleMania match even prior to all of that is not something that interests me in hindsight. It's like, nah, I'm good. We didn't need to see that any more times than we did. I saw it. I'm good. And unfortunately, this match was not giving the closing spot either, mainly because of, Hogan having the other match and Warrior's return being saved for the end of the show. But all of that said, this was the world title match at the first WrestleMania I ever saw live, and I friggin' loved it. It was a dramatic roller coaster, and I'm not going to, deny just how greatly Savage and Flair worked with each other on this night. I thought it was an amazingly well-done match with the great angle with Miss Elizabeth thrown in and Flair putting the moves on Elizabeth and claiming she was his long before she was Randy's, and having the pictures of Elizabeth, which he never showed us. Damn it, Rick. And so many different things go on. Even Mr. Perfect's involvement in this match helped make it better. It was a very well-told dramatic story and an excellent, excellent match. And just because you might think that the match with Hogan should have taken place, or you think that Flair should have main evented this pay-per-view, all of that aside, I think that this is a stellar match and probably my personal favorite match from this WrestleMania. And considering it was the first WrestleMania I ever watched live, I could say thank you to both Rick and Randy for giving me one hell of a show. I mean, you guys aren't surprised, right? I mean, when you think of Ric Flair at his best, you think of 1989, really, because the feud with Terry Funk was excellent, and before that, he had this amazing trilogy of matches with Ricky Steamboat for the NWA World Title that really defined the Crockett promotion at this point in time. And it's a legendary trio of matches that stand to this day as some of the greatest matches in the history of pro wrestling. So when I think of Ric Flair at his best, and when I think of his greatest rival, immediately I think of his work with Ricky Steamboat. And again, it's one of those things where, yeah, they're both technically sound wrestlers and they can have, like, quote-unquote great work rate, but really what made them work so well as opponents are the differences in their personalities, where Ricky was the straight-laced, white-hatted good guy who always did the right thing and was the family man and all that other stuff. And Ric Flair was the dirty son of a bitch that cheated his way to the title and slept with women and partied and did all these other things and was a little rascal, shall we say. So that character clash made for a very exciting series of matches where you wanted to see Steamboat beat him, culminating in Ricky Steamboat's first title win at Chi-Town Rumble in '89. Their rematch was the 2 out of 3 Falls match at Clash of the Champions 6, which I also rewatched as part of my live stream series. Excellent, excellent match that went nearly an hour. And finally, they closed it up with their deciding battle in Wrestle War '89, where Ric Flair would win back the gold. All 3 matches are great. All 3 matches offer something a little bit different. All 3 matches tell a slightly different story, and all 3 matches are outstanding. The story evolved with each different match, and You know, when I did my top 10 list for the greatest trilogies in the history of pro wrestling, this was also fairly high on that list. It's an excellent series of matches. Now, if I had to rank them, and if you ask me this again tomorrow, I might give you a completely different answer, but if I had to rank them right now, I would probably say that the best one is the Chi-Town Rumble match, because that, for me personally, that one might be my favorite because that's the one where Ricky won the belt. Their second best is the 2 out of 3 Falls match that went nearly an hour on Clash of Champions, which I said was the greatest match in Clash of Champions history, which is saying a lot when you look at some of Ric Flair's other matches from those shows, like the match with Sting from the first one and the match with Terry Funk, and some of his tag matches with Arn Anderson as his partner, their battle against the Hollywood Blondes and various other things, the unification match with Sting. Flair was Mr. Clash of Champions, but I think that the 2 out of 3 Falls match was Steamboat was his personal best from that series of shows. And the weakest, quote-unquote, weakest one was the Wrestle War match, which was an excellent match that had a great atmosphere. Why is it my least favorite of the 3? It's just not as memorable as the other 2. Oh no. Darn them. But yeah, all 3 matches are fantastic and definitely must see for any wrestling fan who's interested in that time period of professional wrestling. And anyone who's a fan of Ric Flair or Ricky Steamboat, chances are if you're a fan of one, you're a fan of both of them. But they are absolutely must-see matches. I have watched each one at least 4 or 5 times each. I think they are that good, and they're always excellent whenever I revisit them. So, when I think of Ric Flair at his finest, when I think of the Nature Boy, the Man, I think of his trilogy of matches with Ricky Steamboat, because Ricky Steamboat was another one who I've said on many occasions is the greatest babyface in the history of the business. And you put him up against Ric Flair, who's one of the greatest heels in the history of the business. I mean, it's going to make magic, and it did. And you know, Ricky's one of my all-time favorites. These are among his best matches. And Ric Flair is obviously one of the most celebrated and considered to be one of the greatest wrestlers in the history of the business, and these are his best matches. So if these matches are listed at the top for both men, they must be really, really good, because both men have a pretty damn good body of work to measure against. So yeah, these are my favorite Ric Flair matches without a doubt, and I think most people who are fans of Ric Flair would say the same.